Within days, strange cars prowled the tree line. A forged no trespassing sign appeared at my gate. Then came the so-called security patrol armed men in matching polos, claiming my land was theirs, waving a fake HOA charter like it was law. I had bought this cabin fair and square, every deed verified by the county clerk, every boundary checked twice. Yet here they were, trespassing on my soil, daring me to back down. At first I thought it was just intimidation, maybe some small-town tough guys trying to scare off the newcomer. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became this was no misunderstanding. It was organized harassment, a coordinated campaign to strip me of my property. And if they thought I'd pack up and leave quietly, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Before we dive into the full story, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to see our community map light up together. When I first rolled my truck down that gravel road toward the cabin, I felt something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in years' hope. The land sat on the edge of Cedar Glass Lake, wrapped by tall pines that whispered in the wind. The cabin itself looked like it had been forgotten by time. The roof sagged on one side, boards curled with rot windows patched with plywood. To most it was a ruin. To me, it was freedom. I'd spent 2 decades chained to desks, trapped in courtrooms, and bureaucratic trenches where paperwork outweighed truth. Every battle felt rigged suits and expensive ties, endless procedures, backroom deals. I needed out. So when I saw the property listed in the county auction buried under forgotten files, I didn't hesitate. I wired the money, filed the deed, triple-checked with the Granite County clerk, and loaded my truck with tools, a generator, and just enough supplies to survive until the place was livable. The drive from Washington was long, but when I turned onto that dirt lane, the silence felt sacred. No car horns, no shouting neighbors, no HOA newsletters dictating grass length. Just pine needles crunching under my boots and the cold breath of the lake drifting up from the shore. I thought I'd finally escaped the system. Those first days were grueling but satisfying. I ripped away rotting boards, patched leaks, shoveled debris out of rooms where raccoons had left their mark. My hands blistered, my back ached, but every nail I hammered felt like a stake driven into the ground saying, "This is mine." By day 4, I'd carved out a space decent enough to sleep without worrying the roof would cave in. By day 5, I'd installed solar panels, a water tank, and cameras. Not because I expected trouble, but because old habits die hard. I'd seen too many men try to take what didn't belong to them. At night, the silence wrapped me like a blanket. The only sounds were owls in the trees and waves lapping the rocks at the shoreline. It was the kind of silent city people forget exists, the kind that makes you realize how loud the rest of your life has been. I slept better than I had in years. But paradise has a way of testing you. On the 8th day, as I balanced on a ladder patching shingles, I saw a black SUV creeping down the path parallel to my property. No plates, windows tinted darker than legal. It didn't pull into my drive. It just stopped at the tree line, idled for 3 minutes, and backed away. I felt the hairs rise on my neck. Maybe a lost hiker, maybe not. Either way, the piece I'd built cracked. The next morning I walked out to find my gate hanging off its hinge. Someone had forced it open. In the center of the path stood a wooden stake hammered deep into the dirt, a shiny aluminum sign nailed to it. Private community area, no trespassing. I stared at it, heat climbing up my chest. This wasn't a county sign. No legal stamp, no code reference. Just a cheap warning someone thought could scare me off. I grabbed my phone, recorded everything, the broken hinge, the fake sign, the empty perimeter with no fences or markers. If anyone tried to claim I was squatting, I'd have proof. That night I reinforced the gate with a crossbar and padlock, then mounted 2 more cameras, one facing the drive, the other toward the woods. I told myself it was just a prank, but deep down I knew. This was the first move. Day after day I worked on the cabin, but my eyes kept drifting to the tree line. Every creak in the woods sounded heavier. Every gust of wind felt like footsteps. Then came the discovery that made my stomach twist. One of my solar panels had stopped reporting. I climbed up and found the bolts loosened, the panel tilted away from the Sunday, not broken, disabled. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing. That night I didn't sleep. I sat inside with my shotgun across my knees, eyes locked on the monitors, waiting for shadows. The silence no longer felt like peace, it felt like a warning. And that's when I realized this wasn't about a broken cabin anymore. This land wasn't just mine to rebuild, it had become a battleground. The morning after I found the solar panel tampered with, I forced myself back into routine, because routine was the only thing keeping me steady. I told myself, fix the ditch for the gray water line, clear the brush, keep working. Don't let paranoia turn you into a prisoner on your own land. but my gut was already screaming that this wasn't just random. Someone wanted me unsettled. By mid-afternoon, sweat dripping from my brow, I heard the crunch of gravel not far off at the drive. I wiped my hands on my jeans, stood up, and there they were, 3 men in matching forest, green polos, gold emblem, stitched on the chest, walking onto my property like they owned the place. 2 carried sidearms on open holsters displayed like trophies. Not deputies, not licensed officers, just private muscle trying to look official. The one in front had the kind of presence you recognize instantly. Squared shoulders, military gait gravel in his voice even before he spoke. "You can't be out here," he said flatly, like it was a fact of nature. No greeting, no introduction, just pure command. I planted my boots firm in the dirt and answered, "This is private property. Bought it at auction last month. Deeds filed with the Granite County clerk. Boundaries are marked and recorded. You're trespassing." He laughed short and sharp like a dog's bark. "You think courthouse paperwork matters out here. This is Clearwater Ridge jurisdiction. You're on HOA managed land. We don't go by courthouse politics, we go by community charter." That last word, charter, burned. It wasn't law, it wasn't binding. It was nothing but paper bullies waved around to scare the uninformed, and they expected me to fold. The 2 flanking him, spread wide, one circling the edge of my clearing like he was casing the place, the other raising his phone recording me. I knew that tactic. Paint me as the aggressor, spin the footage, later claim I was some trespasser resisting enforcement. So I did what I'd learned years ago in the trenches of law enforcement. I documented everything. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and made sure my voice carried. "You are on my land, without warrant, without authority, and without my consent. Leave now, or I will call the sheriff's office and file charges for criminal trespass and harassment." For a moment I saw hesitation flicker in their eyes, but only for a moment. The leader, later I'd learn his name was Harold Lott, stepped closer, close enough that I smelled tobacco on his breath. He snatched the tablet I'd been carrying, the one with the parcel maps. Reflex took over. I yanked it back hard enough that for a split second we were locked like 2 wolves fighting over a bone. I broke the grip, stepped back, tablet tight in my hand. My voice dropped an octave. "Touch me again and you'll regret it." That drew a smirk. "Is that a threat?" he asked, faux innocence dripping off every word. "No," I said, staring straight into his eyes. "It's a guarantee of what happens next." For 10 long seconds, none of us moved. The only sound was the breeze rattling pine needles overhead. My finger hovered inches from dialing the sheriff. His men waited for my flinch. But I didn't flinch. Finally, Harold gave a short nod, lifted his hand, and the others pulled back. "This isn't over," he said, gravel chewing through each syllable. Then they walked back to a dark green Jeep with no plates, only an HOA decal on the rear window. When the engine rumbled away, my knees finally released the tension I'd locked in. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from rage, so hot it felt electric. I'd dealt with gang members, dirty politicians, and corner-cutting executives. But this HOA enforcers playing soldier on land they didn't own, that was a new kind of rot. After they left, I swept the perimeter. One of my trail cams had been ripped clean off the mount. Not smashed, not stolen, just removed. A quiet message: we can get close, closer than you think. Another motion light by the shed was twisted sideways, its bulb loosened. Subtle sabotage meant to chip away at my security, to make me second-guess every shadow. I tightened every bolt, reinstalled the light, mounted the camera higher with reinforced screws. I wasn't going to be an easy mark. But that night, sleep refused to come. Every sound outside carried weight. The groan of timber in the wind sounded like boots on gravel. My phone buzzed with motion alerts, most false, but each one spiked my heart rate. At 2:40 inches the morning, the driveway camera lit up. I grabbed the phone thumb, fumbling. 2 figures on screen. Masks, flashlights, moving slow, deliberate, not kids messing around. One crouched near the porch steps, fiddling with the latch. The other scanned the windows with some handheld device, thermal maybe, or just a high-powered light. My hand found the shotgun before my brain caught up. I racked it once, the metallic crack echoing through the cabin, and shouted through the door. You take one more step, and this turns into a felony scene. Cameras are rolling. Sheriff's already called. They froze. Then bolted. Branches snapped as they vanished into the woods. But they left gifts behind: a baseball bat, a crowbar, and a 2-way radio lying face down in the dirt. Static hissed through the speaker, then a faint mutter cut off mid-sentence. Not police chatter. Private frequency. I crouched, photographed everything: footprints, tools, the radio tuned to their channel, uploaded the files to cloud storage. Sent a message to Colton Hale, the only man I trusted from my years working homicide. He didn't text back. he called. "You safe?" he asked. "For now," I said, my voice tight. "Stay put. I'm driving out." I thought he'd still be working his county case, but when Colton said he was on his way, I knew this was bigger than a boundary dispute. By dawn, he rolled up in a dust-caked Chevy Coffee in one hand, Glock on his hip. He scanned the perimeter, crouched by the footprints, and shook his head. "This isn't amateur hour," he muttered. "No," I said, holding up the radio. "This is organized." He took one look at the emblem stitched on the crowbar bag, then at the twisted motion light above us. "You're not just dealing with neighbors, man. You're dealing with a machine." And in that moment, the truth settled over me, heavy as armor. This wasn't a simple dispute. This was a siege, and I wasn't backing down. Colton wasn't the kind of man to waste words. After he circled the cabin and checked the perimeter, he came inside, tossed his jacket on the chair, and opened that battered black notebook he always carried. The notebook looked older than both of us pages. Dog-eared corners curling the leather cover, scuffed from years of chasing monsters through alleys and courtrooms. He clicked his pen, glanced at me, and said, "Start from the beginning, every detail." So I did. I told him about the SUV idling at the tree line, the forced gate, the fake aluminum sign, the so-called patrol in matching polos herald Lot's gravel-voiced threat, the trail cam ripped down the solar panel sabotaged. And finally, the masked men at my door with crowbars in the middle of the night. I laid it all out, and with each word his jaw tightened. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and said, "This isn't intimidation anymore. This is organized harassment. Pattern behavior. They've done this before, probably, to people less stubborn than you." I stared at him, my chest burning. "You think they've been running people off? For what, land grabs?" "Wouldn't be the first time," Colton muttered, scribbling notes. "Shell companies, bogus boundary disputes, fake charters. It's pressure. They push until you either sell cheap or abandon the property. Then the HOA or some developer scoops it up." The weight of it hit me hard. This wasn't just about me. My lot was one battle in a bigger war. Later that morning, I went back outside to clear my head. The air smelled sharp, pine resin, and damp soil. But peace was gone. I kept scanning the woods, waiting for another shadow. Sure enough, just after noon, a man in a windbreaker walked up my drive like he owned the place. He wasn't armed, not visibly, but he carried a manila envelope tucked under his arm. "You the property owner?" he asked, voice slick, practiced. "Depends who's asking," I said, standing square on the porch. "I represent Cedar Holdings LLC," he continued, pulling the envelope free. "We have claim to the southern sliver of your parcel, 15 feet wide, originally part of a boundary dispute in 1986. Here are the documents." He handed me a photocopy, the kind that looked almost too clean for its supposed age. I studied it carefully. The signature on the deed looked faint, slanted, inconsistent with the county records I'd already reviewed. The seal was blurry, like someone had run it through a bad copier, and the company name Cedar Holdings rang no bells. "Interesting," I said, keeping my tone flat. "You got a court order to back that up." He hesitated, then smiled thinly. "We're trying to resolve this amicably. No need to escalate." "Then come back with the sheriff," I replied. "Until then, get off my land." His eyes flicked past me to the cabin like he was measuring it. Then he turned without another word and walked back down the drive. Colton, who'd been watching from the tree line, shook his head. "Paperwork scam," he said. "I'll run Cedar Holdings through the state database." Within an hour, he had the answer. Cedar Holdings LLC had been registered just 2 weeks prior. No physical office, only a P.O. box in Kalispell. No listed officers, no legitimate business filings. A shell, plain and simple. That night, the noise campaign returned. First, it was the barking dog mechanical, repeating every 40 seconds. Then came a high-pitched hum, barely audible, but drilling into the skull like a dentist's drill. It lasted 20 minutes, then cut off. The following night, it was recorded glass-breaking, faint, maddening, perfectly timed. By the third night, I started keeping logs. The times varied, but the pattern was obvious. Psychological warfare designed to wear me down. Colton flipped through my notes and muttered classic tactics. Not enough to draw blood, just enough to make you snap. I felt the vice tightening, and I knew if I didn't strike back, they'd keep twisting. That's when I came up with the bait. I recorded a sloppy video on my old YouTube channel, the one I hadn't touched since posting motorcycle reviews years back. In the clip, I stood by my truck, bags piled in the bed, muttering about burnout and needing a reset in Spokane. I let the camera pan across the cabin windows, shutters open, lights off. Then down to the gate padlock, hanging open like I'd forgotten to lock it. I titled it "Off-Grid Burnout, Time to Reset" and uploaded it. Within hours, it had a couple hundred views. Mostly bots, but I didn't care. What mattered was that the right eyes would see it. Sure enough, at 2:47 a.m. The next night, the east side motion cam pinged. I'd shut down the obvious lights and cameras, but the hidden thermal cam inside the cabin was rolling. Two figures crept across the clearing, one carrying bolt cutters, the other gripping a crowbar. They moved fast, sloppy, like they thought the place was empty. I waited until the one with the cutters stepped into the blind spot near the propane tank. Then I hit the switch. Floodlights, blazed, sirens wailed like an air raid alarm. Both froze deer in headlights. I kicked open the cabin door shotgun, leveled but not aimed. Down on the ground, hands visible, I roared. They panicked. One bolted for the woods. The other sprinted toward the Jeep they'd parked at the drive. But Colton had been waiting, engine off, lights out. His voice cracked through the night like thunder. Don't move hands where I can see them. 5 minutes later, the Lincoln County deputies were on scene. The one we caught gave his name as Craig Marlowe, said he was volunteer security for Clearwater Ridge HOA. No badge, no license, nothing official. In his backpack, deputies found gloves, radios tuned to the same frequency as the one I'd seized earlier, and most damning of all, a map of my property marked with red X's where my cameras, generator, and breaker box were located. I stood there, shotgun still warm in my hands, watching the deputies haul him away. And for the first time since stepping onto that land, I felt the tide shift. They had played their game. Now I was playing mine. But as Colton reminded me, this was just the opening move. You caught one pawn, he said quietly. But the queen's still out there, and she won't take this lying down. He was right, because the next morning she arrived in person. The morning haze was still hanging over the lake when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I'd been on edge since the arrest of Craig Marlowe, knowing full well the HOA wouldn't simply fold after losing one of their volunteers. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing and stepped outside. That's when I saw it, a pearl-white Lexus SUV pulling up the drive like it was a Sunday brunch invitation. The door opened, and she emerged. Perfectly coiffed platinum hair sprayed into a helmet that didn't move with the breeze. Designer sunglasses reflecting the morning Sunday. A tailored jacket and pearls so deliberate they screamed performance. And in her manicured hands, a pie dish wrapped in a gingham towel. "Mr. Sloan," she said sweetly, her voice sugared but hollow. "I thought it was time we had a proper conversation. I brought something homemade." I stood at the top of the porch steps, arms crossed the shotgun, leaned casually but visibly against the wall behind me. "You're trespassing," I said flatly. She gave a tinkling laugh like I'd just told a corny joke. "Oh, hush. Just being neighborly. My late husband adored my peach pies. I thought you might too." Her name I already knew from Colton's files was Karen Whitfield, president of the Clearwater Ridge HOA, the so-called queen bee of this mess. And now here she was, standing in my driveway with a smile so polished it could blind. "You've made quite an impression on the community," she continued, eyes scanning my property like an appraiser. "There's been confusion about boundaries. Some of the older maps are misleading. The board would be happy to review your application and make this transition seamless." I stepped down one stair, closing the distance just enough that she could see I wasn't budging. "I'm not part of your community. I've got a recorded deed filed with the county clerk. And I'm not paying dues to a club I didn't join." Her smile didn't crack, but I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, a flash of calculation like a card sharp, realizing she'd lost a hand but already thinking about the next. She placed the pie dish carefully on the porch railing. "Well," she said softly, "I do hope we won't have to escalate anything." She turned, slid into her Lexus, and rolled down the window one last time. "Enjoy the dessert." The SUV purred back down the drive, leaving dust hanging in the air. I didn't touch the pie. It sat there until the sun baked it to mush, a symbol of poisoned hospitality. That night, the campaign escalated. At precisely 3 a.m., the sound of a barking dog echoed through the trees. Not a real dog, it was too rhythmic, too repetitive. A recording blasted through hidden speakers every 40 seconds like clockwork. When it stopped, a high-pitched hum took its place, drilling into my skull until my teeth ached. The next night it was breaking glass. Then sirens. Then the floodlight flickered on and off in patterns, not random at all. Colton stayed in the cabin with me, his Glock on the table, jotting notes in that damn black book. "This is psychological warfare," he muttered. "They're trying to exhaust you. Wear you down until you pack up and leave." "Then they picked the wrong man," I said, jaw clenched. But it didn't stop there. On the 5th day, a man in a windbreaker showed up again, this time claiming to represent a holding company with rights to the southern strip of my land. He waved documents supposedly signed in 1986, but I'd already checked county records. The signature was a forgery. The company registered 2 weeks ago, no office, just a P.O. box. Colton ran the name, came back shaking his head. Shell Corporation. They're building a paper trail to steal you out of your own cabin. That night, the noises returned, followed by 3 sharp knocks on the side of the cabin at exactly 4:00 a.m., just out of range of the cameras. I didn't answer. I just sat in the dark, shotgun across my lap, rage simmering in my chest. They're counting on you to break, Colton said quietly, but you don't strike me as the breaking type. I shook my head. No, I'm the type that strikes back. So we devised a plan. If they wanted to believe I was cracking, I'd give them just enough rope to hang themselves. I recorded another video filmed like an exhausted man about to give up. Bags loaded in the truck padlock left swinging on the gate. I uploaded it to my old channel with the title, Off-Grid Burnout, Time to Reset. It didn't take long. Just after midnight, the motion cam pinged. 2 figures approached, different men, this time sloppier, bolder. One carried bolt cutters, the other a crowbar. They split up, one heading for the shed, the other toward the cabin door. I waited until the one by the propane tank stepped into the blind spot. Then I hit the switch. Floodlights roared to life, sirens blared. The clearing lit up like a stadium. Both froze deer in headlights. I kicked open the cabin door, shotgun raised. Down on the ground, hands visible. One bolted for the woods. The other sprinted toward the Jeep they'd parked at the drive. But Colton was waiting there in his Chevy, engine off, lights out. His voice cracked like a whip, "Don't move, hands where I can see them." 5 minutes later, deputies from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office rolled in. The man we caught was indeed HOA security, another volunteer. In his pack, they found radios tuned to the same frequency as before, gloves, maps of my property with red X's marking my cameras, my breaker box, even the generator lines. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't just trespass. This was a coordinated operation. As they cuffed him and hauled him into the back of the cruiser, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, they weren't in control. They'd made the mistake of underestimating me. And now the spotlight wasn't on me being a trespasser. It was on them playing militia under the HOA's banner. Still, Colton reminded me as we stood under the glare of the squad car lights, you caught a pawn. But the queen, she's still out there. And you better believe she's going to make her next move soon. He was right. Because the very next morning I woke to find Karen Whitfield's Lexus parked at the county courthouse. And she wasn't holding pie this time, she was holding lawyers. The courthouse in Granite County was a squat square building with faded brick and a flagpole that squeaked in the wind. Most days, its docket was quiet, property disputes, DUIs, the occasional petty theft. But that morning, the parking lot buzzed with something darker. Reporters with cameras stood clustered near the steps. Sheriff's deputies kept a wary eye on the crowd. And front and center, pulling up in her pearl-white Lexus, was none other than Karen Whitfield. Gone was the saccharine hostess with her poisoned peach pie. This version of Karen wore a tailored navy suit, pearls, perfectly arranged sunglasses large enough to hide the twitch in her eyes. Behind her, 2 men climbed out of a black SUV. Not lawyers, not deputies, private bodyguards, ex-military, by the look of their square jaws and tactical posture. I sat on the bench across the street, Colton beside me, sipping burnt courthouse coffee from a styrofoam cup. He muttered without looking up, "When the queen leaves her hive, she's already bleeding. Otherwise, she'd send drones." Karen strutted up the steps, waving to the press like a politician at a fundraiser. But her smile never reached her eyes. She'd lost ground when Craig Marlowe was arrested, and she knew it. This was her counterstrike. Inside the courtroom, I took my place at the wooden table opposite her lawyers, 3 of them each carrying sleek leather briefcases. They filed motions with quick, confident hands, tossing out words like injunction, trespass, unauthorized occupation. According to their script, I wasn't the owner of my cabin at all. I was a squatter on community property. But Colton had spent the past week arming me with more than just a shotgun. He laid out parcel maps, GPS coordinates, certified deeds stamped by the county clerk, and even a quiet title filing we'd rush through with a sympathetic judge. Every time their lead counsel waved a photocopy, we countered with originals. Every time they argued community charter, I reminded the court that state law superseded voluntary bylaws. The judge, a gray-haired woman with no patience for theatrics, finally leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, voice cool as stone. "I've seen no evidence that Clearwater Ridge has jurisdiction over this parcel. This case is beginning to look less like a boundary dispute and more like harassment." The corner of Karen's smile twitched. For the first time since she set foot in that room, she looked rattled. After the hearing adjourned, Colton and I stepped outside into the Sunday. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Sloan, how do you respond to the HOA's claims? Do you plan to stay on the property despite the threats? Are you afraid? I looked directly into one of the cameras and said, "This is my land, bought legally, recorded legally. If anyone thinks they can bully me off it with forged papers and midnight raids, they've got another thing coming." That soundbite hit the evening news. By the next day, my phone buzzed non-stop messages from strangers across the country, victims of HOA, overreach people who'd been fined for bird baths or threatened for painting their doors the wrong shade of beige. My YouTube burnout video suddenly had thousands of views. What started as bait was now a beacon. But the HOA wasn't finished. That night, the sounds returned. Not barking this time, no, they'd grown more creative. A looping audio track of a baby crying shrill and endless piped from somewhere in the woods. It drilled into my skull until my vision blurred. At 4 a.m., 3 sharp knocks rattled the cabin wall. Perfectly timed, perfectly placed, just out of reach of my cameras. I sat in the dark shotgun across my knees, listening to my own pulse hammer in my ears. They wanted me to crack, to storm outside, blind with rage, into the trees where they controlled the shadows. I didn't. I stayed put. And when the noises finally stopped, I wrote every detail in my log. 2 days later, Colton slammed a folder on my table. "Got it," he said. Inside were records pulled from the Secretary of State's office, Cedar Holdings LLC, the shell company that had sent the windbreaker messenger with forged documents, registered exactly 2 weeks before the harassment began. No listed officers, no real address, just a P.O. box tied back to Karen's own law firm. "That's fraud," Colton said, his finger stabbing the page. "Document falsification, criminal conspiracy. Not just harassment anymore. This is prosecutable." We gathered everything: videos of the break-ins, photos of the tools left behind, audio of the harassment, copies of the forged deed logs of the shell company. Colton even pulled old HOA filings that revealed a pattern: vacant parcels suddenly folded into the community owners, pressured into selling for pennies, then the land flipped to developers. When we took it to the county attorney, his eyes widened. This isn't a dispute. This is organized crime hiding under the banner of an HOA. The attorney passed it to the state prosecutor. And just like that, the case shifted from property squabble to criminal conspiracy. For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm was passing. But that night, standing on my porch, I saw the Lexus again at the tree line. Headlights off, engine idling, watching. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, my reflection ghosted in the cabin window, and whispered to myself, "They think I'm prey. They don't know I'm the hunter." Because this war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The shift came fast. One day, I was the trespasser fighting off night raids with a shotgun. The next, I was sitting at my porch table with Colton blueprinting an ambush like we were back on task force duty. He drew diagrams in that scuffed black notebook, arrows and X's marking every approach to the cabin. "They'll be back," he said, tapping the page with his pen. "Not Karen herself, she's too careful, but her men. They'll want to finish what they started." I leaned forward. "Then we let them think they're winning. Give them just enough rope. That's how we designed the bait." I'd already tested the waters with the burnout video, and it had hooked them once. This time we'd make it bigger, sloppier, more believable. Bags piled in the truck bed, lights left off, gate padlock dangling open. Even a staged clip of me muttering into the camera about needing a break, maybe heading into town for a few days. By sundown, the video was live. My old YouTube channel, dead for years, suddenly pulsed with activity. 100 views, then 1,000. Comments popped up from strangers. "Stay safe, brother. HOAs are a plague. Don't back down." But I wasn't counting on internet support. I was counting on the HOA watching too. That night, Colton parked his Chevy half a mile down the road, hidden by pines. I killed the obvious cameras, left the porch dark, but the hidden thermal rig inside kept rolling. My shotgun leaned against the table. My pulse hammered in my ears as midnight crept past. At 2, 4, 7 a.m., the east side motion alert pinged. 2 figures emerged from the woods, moving fast but sloppy. Not the masked men from before. These guys were clumsier, maybe volunteers who thought this was just another intimidation run. One carried bolt cutters, the other gripped a crowbar. They split, one angling toward the shed, the other creeping to the porch. I waited until the one with the cutters stepped into the blind spot near the propane tank. Then I slammed the switch. Floodlights ignited, sirens screamed, the clearing exploded with light and sound. Both froze deer caught in a nuclear sunrise. I kicked open the cabin door, shotgun raised but steady, down on the ground, hands where I can see them. One bolted, instantly disappearing into the tree line. The other sprinted toward the Jeep parked at the drive, but Colton was already waiting. Engine off, lights out. He stepped out with his Glock-drawn voice booming, "Don't move, hands up now." The man froze mid-stride. Seconds later, Lincoln County deputies rolled in tires, spitting gravel. Flashlights slashed across the clearing. They cuffed the intruder and dragged him to the cruiser. His name was confirmed, on site, Craig Marlowe, HOA security volunteer. Not licensed, not deputized. Just a thug in a polo with delusions of authority. His backpack told the real story, radios tuned to the same private frequency as the one I'd seized before, gloves, and a hand-drawn map of my property marked with red X's, my breaker box generator cables, every camera mount. The deputies took photos. Colton recorded everything on his body cam. The evidence piled up neat and irrefutable. This wasn't a dispute anymore. This was premeditated, coordinated crime. By dawn, word was already spreading. I uploaded a short clip of the ambush to my channel, edited clean, showing just enough to make the point. HOA patrol raids, cabin caught on camera. Within hours, views spiked. By nightfall, local news stations were calling. That evening, as Colton and I sat with beers on the porch, headlights appeared at the end of the drive. Not Karen this time. A reporter. He introduced himself from a Montana news station, mic and cameraman in tow. "We've had calls all morning about Clearwater Ridge HOA. Can you give us a statement?" I told them the truth. That my land was mine, that the HOA had no authority, and that intimidation tactics wouldn't scare me off. The reporter's eyes widened at the map of red X's, the confiscated radios, the photos of tire tracks circling my property. When the story aired that night, the headline screamed across the bottom of the screen, "HOA, accused of night raid on private cabin." The following morning, my inbox flooded. Victims from Nevada, Texas, Florida, people who'd been fined, harassed, threatened by their own HOAs, reached out. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just my fight. This was bigger. But Karen wasn't about to take that lying down. 2 days later, Colton tossed a stack of printed emails onto my porch table. Anonymous tipster sent these. Looks like an insider. The pages were HOA board communications. Dry bureaucratic language until you read between the lines. Apply noise cycle. Disable solar. Stage another presence event. He's cracked. Give it a few more days. It was all there. The harassment schedule, the sabotage orders. Proof this wasn't a rogue volunteer patrol. It was sanctioned by the board under Karen's direction. Colton leaned back in his chair, rubbing the stubble on his jaw. "This isn't HOA territory anymore. This is conspiracy. We take this to the state prosecutor." We compiled everything, the break-in footage, the radios, the maps, the forged deed tied to Karen's shell company, now these emails. A package thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. When the state prosecutor's office received it, they called back within a day. "We're opening a criminal investigation. Stay put and stay armed." That night, sitting on the porch, I watched the lake shimmer under the moon. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Not victory, no, that was still far off, but momentum. Still, as the crickets chirped and the water lapped softly at the shore, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen herself was still out there watching, waiting to play her queen's move. And when it came, it wouldn't be subtle. The storm finally broke the following week, though not in the way I expected. Up to that point, everything the HOA had thrown at me was shadow play harassment in the night-forged paperwork, intimidation by polo shirt soldiers. But when the state prosecutor officially opened their criminal investigation, the battle shifted into the sunlight where cameras and reporters thrived. It started with a call from a podcast producer in Denver. He wanted an interview about HOA tyranny, something about exposing how ordinary citizens were being bullied out of their homes. I hesitated. Going public meant giving up whatever privacy I still had, but Colton leaned forward at the table, tapping that damn notebook of his. "Go loud," he said. "The more people watching, the harder it is for them to bury you." So I did. By the time the interview went live, my YouTube video of the ambush had passed 1,000,000 views. Strangers filled the comment section with their own horror stories. A woman in Nevada posted about her HOA fining her $500 for wind chimes. A man in Texas said they tried to seize his land over a barbecue pit. I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was the unwilling spokesperson for every homeowner ever bullied by a board with too much power and too little oversight. That exposure drew the queen out of her castle. On a Wednesday morning, heavy with clouds and the smell of rain, Karen Whitfield herself arrived at the county courthouse, not as a plaintiff this time, but as a defendant. She didn't sneak in through the side door. No, she made an entrance, stepping out of her Lexus in a tailored jacket, Pearl's shining chin tilted high like she was attending a gala instead of a criminal arraignment. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. One shouted, "Mrs. Whitfield, do you deny the harassment allegations?" She didn't answer, just flashed that brittle smile, the kind that masks fear with arrogance. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Local residents packed the benches, some clutching signs HOA is not above the law. Others whispered anxiously, hoping their own grievances might finally be heard. I sat with Colton at the defense table. My evidence piled high thermal footage of intruders' confiscated radios, forged deeds, internal HOA emails, instructing members to apply pressure. Across from me sat Karen, flanked by two lawyers with faces like stone. The prosecutor stood first. His voice was calm, deliberate, like a surgeon opening a chest. He laid out the charges one by one: conspiracy to intimidate, falsification of documents, harassment, unlawful surveillance, criminal trespass. Each word dropped into the room like a hammer on an anvil. Then came the evidence. First, the video of Craig Marlowe's arrest, him bolting across my clearing before Colton intercepted him, the backpack full of maps and radios laid out on the deputy's hood. The jury leaned forward. Then the emails projected on a screen. Disable solar. Noise cycle. Stage another presence event. Gasps rippled across the benches. When it was Karen's turn to respond, she tried to paint me as a grifter. "This man staged incidents for the internet," she sneered. "He's a squatter exploiting the community's goodwill. This is performance, not reality." But the prosecutor was ready. He played a clip from my trail cam, showing two masked men tampering with the cabin porch, their radios crackling on the same private frequency we'd recorded. Then he played audio of Karen's own board meeting, leaked by a whistleblower, her voice sharp as glass, ordering members to make him crack whatever it takes. The mask slipped. Her polished smile hardened into a scowl. The next witness was a retired logger named George Peterson, who'd once owned a parcel near Clearwater Ridge. He testified that after refusing to pay dues for land outside HOA jurisdiction, his fence had mysteriously been cut and his generator destroyed. He sold out cheap. Others followed a widow whose dog had been poisoned after she refused board demands, a young couple driven out by noise campaigns eerily similar to mine. By the third day, the case was no longer about one stubborn man with a shotgun. It was about a system of control, weaponized bylaws, and a woman who wielded intimidation like a gavel. On cross-examination, Harold Lott himself, the ex-military enforcer, took the stand. He tried to frame himself as a pawn, just following directives. But under pressure, he admitted he knew my property wasn't HOA land. He just didn't care. "Not worth the paperwork," he muttered. The courtroom went silent. Even Karen's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Then came the breaking point. The prosecutor read aloud private messages Karen had sent to her board. "He's a disease that needs to be excised. Use any means short of murder to get him gone." The room froze. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. Cameras clicked. Karen's face flushed crimson. She stood finger shaking at me and shouted, "This is all fake. He staged this entire thing. He's a fraud, a squatter, a liar." The judge slammed her gavel so hard the sound cracked like a gunshot. "Mrs. Whitfield, one more outburst, and you'll be removed from this courtroom." But the damage was done. She had just handed the press their headline. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the weight of the silence was suffocating. Colton leaned close and whispered, "They'll convict. Question is how hard." He was right. By the end of the week, the verdicts came down guilty on conspiracy, document falsification, harassment, and incitement to trespass. The judge's voice was firm. "Mrs. Whitfield, your actions represent a deliberate subversion of lawful property rights for private gain. You are hereby sentenced to 14 years in state prison." Her allies fell like dominoes. Harold received 8 years for illegal entry and aggravated harassment. Another officer, Richard Klaus, got 6. Marlowe, who cooperated, earned a suspended 3-year sentence and a fine. Most shocking of all, the HOA itself was ordered dissolved, its assets seized by the county and redirected to a victims' restitution fund. When Karen was escorted out in cuffs, the cameras caught her screaming, "I was protecting the neighborhood. This is tyranny," but nobody believed her anymore. Outside, the courthouse steps became a stage. Residents cheered, holding signs, "Cabin rights are human rights." Reporters shoved mics into my face. "What's next for you?" one asked. I glanced at Colton, then back at the cameras. "Next," I said, "I finish what I started. I rebuild my cabin and I make damn sure no one else gets bullied off their land." And in that moment, under the flashing bulbs and the roar of the crowd, I realized I hadn't just defended a cabin. I'd helped crack open the rotten core of an empire. The verdict changed everything. For weeks, I'd lived like a soldier under siege shotgun, never out of reach, sleep fractured by the hum of radios and phantom knocks on the cabin walls. But after Karen Whitfield was hauled away in cuffs, the woods around Cedar Glass Lake finally went quiet. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was cleansing. Still, I didn't celebrate right away. Victory in court doesn't always mean safety in the real world. I knew too many of her loyalists still lurked in the shadows, men who'd played soldier under her command. But day by day the pressure eased, patrols vanished, the fake signs came down. For the first time in months, I could walk the perimeter without the weight of eyes on my back. The first thing I did was rebuild the gate, not just stronger, smarter. Reinforced steel posts sunk deep into concrete. A crossbar lock system welded in place, motion-triggered spotlights lining the drive, and a sign bright red that left no room for misinterpretation, no trespassing HOA not recognized, protected by law. From there, I turned to the cabin itself. I tore off the remaining sagging shingles and replaced the entire roof with double-layer asphalt. Every busted window came out swapped for tempered double-pane glass. I laid a new wood stove into the hearth, sealed the warped floorboards, and sanded down the walls until the smell of rot was gone, replaced by the sharp tang of cedar oil. It wasn't just about making the place livable, it was about reclaiming it. Every nail I drove into the frame felt like driving one into the coffin of the Clearwater Ridge HOA. Colton stayed a few more weeks, splitting time between the county records office and my deck where we sat with beers watching the sun melt into the lake. One evening he handed me a thumb drive. "Everything's on here," he said. "Videos, audio documents, the raw thermal footage from the night we caught Marlowe. Keep it safe. This story isn't over, not by a long shot." He was right. By then, the YouTube video I'd posted during the ambush had passed 2 million views. What had started as bait for the HOA had turned into something bigger, a beacon for people across the country. My inbox overflowed with messages. A man in Texas wrote that he used my walkthrough on parcel maps to beat a fraudulent HOA fine in court. A woman in Nevada said she played my video for her city council, and for the first time, they actually listened. I renamed the channel Cabin Rights and leaned in. Every week I posted not just updates about the cabin, but practical guides: how to request county records, how to challenge HOA authority, how to spot forged documents. People wrote back saying I made them feel sane again. That I gave them the courage to fight. Meanwhile, Clearwater Ridge itself became a ghost town. With Karen locked away and the board dissolved, there was no one left to police lawn heights or threaten families over mailbox paint. The residents didn't crumble, they adapted. Word spread that they were forming a cooperative, instead voluntary and transparent. No fines, no patrols, no intimidation, just neighbors deciding how to live together. Imagine that. Then one afternoon in late spring, a letter arrived. Not an email, a real letter, hand-addressed in looping cursive. It was from a woman named Mabel Hoffman, one of the oldest homeowners around the lake. Inside was a recipe card. At the top, in neat handwriting, it read, "Peach pie." Beneath, she'd written, "Here's the real version," not the one Karen weaponized. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it into the fire pit. That night I baked my first pie, badly burning the edges, but it tasted like victory. Like reclaiming something sweet from someone who had tried to turn it into poison, the cabin became more than a refuge. It became a rallying point. Sometimes neighbors wandered over to swap stories, share tools, or sit on the deck watching the lake. I built a small dock with 2 chairs and a table just big enough for me and Colton to sit with our beers, breathing air that finally felt clean again. But I also knew I couldn't erase what had happened, and I didn't want to. Some scars need to stay visible as warnings. That's why I added one last sign below the red "No Trespassing" placard at the gate. In bold black letters it read, "Smile, Karen, you're on camera, just for old time's sake." The lesson in all this isn't about cabins or courtrooms, it's about resolve. Bullies, whether they wear suits, badges, or polo shirts with fake emblems, count on people folding under pressure. They rely on silence, on fear, on exhaustion, and most of the time it works. But the moment someone stands their ground, refuses to bend, documents everything, and fights back, that's when the entire rotten structure starts to crack. If you're watching this, maybe you've been there yourself. Maybe you've dealt with neighbors, HOAs, or officials who thought they could control your life through intimidation. Let this be a reminder you don't have to bow. The law is still stronger than lies, and truth still burns brighter than fear. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever stood up to an HOA or a bully who thought they held all the cards. And if you want to join this growing community of fighters, hit subscribe, because the more of us who stand together, the less power these so-called kings and queens will ever hold again.